And I definitely want to have some time for the cabinet to be able to speak. And just to be clear, because we have members of the public and member of the cabinet, we'll be really clear about when we're accepting. During the reports, we'll be open to cabinet members. And then at the end, there is time for public comment. So just keep that in mind. First thing I'm going to do is welcome Adam Joseph from the Office of the Lieutenant Governor. Adam and I have worked together for years. It's great to see you, Adam. I don't know if you have any welcoming remarks or comments before we get started.
Thank you, Commissioner. The Lieutenant Governor sends her regards. She apologizes for not being able to attend today. When the governor asked you to be somewhere as Lieutenant Governor, you show up. So she sends her apologies. Just as the parent of a 2-year-old, I'm deeply interested in the market rate survey and looking forward to participating in the cabinet meeting today. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I don't think the market rate survey will surprise you as a parent of a 2-year-old. I can remember before the baby was born. I'm forgetting her name.
Her name is Andy.
Andy, and you're going to have to put a picture in the chat so people can see if you're willing. But Andy is the cutest little thing. She's going to be a soccer player. Remember those conversations when you were saying, it's $400 a week for infant care. How are we going to do this? And I bet you found it even was higher than that. So I remember that well, and I'm glad you're here on behalf of the Lieutenant Governor. She has been such a support to the Office of Early Childhood and Child Care in general throughout the pandemic. Whenever we call, she comes, and please send her our regards. And that's right, she listens to the governor before us. So great. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Julie Giacconi, who is our incredible CCDF lead. And really happy to have you aboard, Julie. And I know you want to talk just for a sec about the purpose of today's meeting and even more broadly, the cabinet.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Sinead, can you advance the slide? Welcome, everyone. The purpose of today's meeting, cabinet meeting, is to come together. We're going to be sharing a lot of information. We have a fun-filled, very full agenda. So we'll be going over the legislative updates. We'll be going over a narrow cost analysis, which is something the state of Connecticut has never done before, but is required by CCDF. We'll be touching on the market rate survey, which is conducted every 3 years. And we have some updates from the Department of Public Health, as well as updates from our statewide inclusion planning team. And I'm going to hand it over to Elena, and if you could advance to the next slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. I'm Elena Trueworthy. I'm Connecticut's Head Start State Collaboration Office Director. And we just wanted to ground everyone again in the history of the Early Childhood Cabinet and a little bit more around its purpose. So as you can see, the history trajectory on this slide. But the creation of the cabinet really came from Section 642 of the Federal Head Start Act, which requires all governors of each state to designate or establish a council to really think about the coordination and collaboration and planning for all children and families across the state. And so the membership of the cabinet really reflects the different agencies that touch young children and families, as well as families themselves, to be able to lend a common voice to the work of not just the OEC, but all agencies across the state. And myself as the Head Start Collab Director, an appointee of the governor, Head Start, along with other child early care and education programs, IDA, a focus on infants and toddlers. It's all about an early childhood system together. Thank you.
And we can hand it over to Beth, our commissioner.
I was unmuting myself. Thank you so much, Elena and Julie. And just so people know, for context, we really have been throughout the pandemic trying to work very closely with Head Start and CCDF and state funding to think about how we can be more collaborative. And the cabinet is a way a group of people who can help us do that. So I'm going to give you a legislative update. It is an exciting update to give, and I want to thank so many on the call who worked hard with us, with the Office of the Governor, and also with the advocacy community, working to try to get the funding needed to deal with some of the huge challenges we face in early childhood right now. OEC did an analysis working with social venture partners on the childcare needs in the state, and it validated what we knew, which was there was a tremendous shortage of infant toddler spaces because of the high cost of infant toddler care, and both for parents and the high cost of providing it for providers. And what the governor offered up to address this problem was $25 million, which doubles the number of state-funded infant toddler spaces at our child daycare programs, and increases the rates for all infants and toddlers in those programs by 58%. So that was a big deal. Senator Fonfara and others worked on $20 million to have a program that would be focused to starting on infants and toddlers and going through preschool, to research what are the features of programs that lead to supporting family success and supporting child success. So that's significant investment in infant toddler care. In addition, there were some funds for school readiness and child daycare stabilization that OEC will be working to fund grants for those programs to help them with some of their challenges. There was also a total of $70 million to supplement wages and compensation for early childhood staff throughout Connecticut. So these are significant investments, and I think Connecticut really is leading the country with some of these models. Next page, please. This page is more of a summary of a number of other programs that aren't quite as systemic. They're more one program after another. So I'll walk you through these. One is that working with the family child care providers, they came to us and said during the pandemic, we were allowed to have 9 children. And as long as we had another staff person, that really worked for us, both from a quality perspective and from a financial perspective. So we passed a bill that allows for up to 9 children in a family child care home, as long as there are 2 staff members. And the regulation has always been that if there are 2 staff members, you can have more than 2 infant toddlers. So those are some changes there that are regulatory. The governor was looking for some regulatory relief and changes, so that's an example of that. We also were able to get funds to fully fund our universal home visiting and community health worker pilot in Bridgeport that the agency is very excited about. You'll be hearing more about that in the future as we get ready to launch it. We are working on the RFP right now. Also $1 million of funding to help support home visiting in New Haven, and then some funding for early childhood apprenticeship, for some facility funding, and then there was also $10 million to reduce the time it takes to expand the time it takes to get to a wait list for Care for Kids. Just for context for this group, and Julie Bisai, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that before the pandemic, we were spending in the area of $120 million a year on Care for Kids. And in 2023, we're slated to spend more than $190 million. So there has been a significant increase in Care for Kids access, but there will ultimately need to be a waiting list after as we come down from all the ARPA funds over time. But this will ease that, and it will be a very slow waiting list. It won't be, the program will not close. We will start and make sure it's a very slow process where, just to give you an example, if 4 families come off of Care for Kids, we might let 3 families on, just slightly less than a one-to-one, or even could get to a one-to-one. It could be that we say for every 10 families that come off will just slowly taper down. So I don't want to misspeak. That is not happening right now. But this 10 million will help us make that taper smoother and will be very helpful. And then there are 7 positions for OEC in that budget. And there will be other positions at OEC that will be funded through the federal funds, because our agency has more than doubled in the past 2 years in the amount of funding and contracts. And the state budget makes that happen almost again. So another 50%. So we are going to need some staffing to be able to do that. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge. So that sums up the legislative update. I don't have a note here, Julie, that is the cabinet able to ask questions at this point or later in the meeting?
Well, we thought, we were wondering, Commissioner, did you want to do roll call now?
Oh, yes, thank you. I was supposed to do roll call before now. I was supposed to do roll call before I gave it to you. Okay. I think it's better now anyway, because some people were a little late coming, so we can flex. Okay, so I'm going to do a roll call, and when you hear your name, will you unmute yourself and say here? Adam Joseph.
Here.
Holly Williams. Deidre Gifford.
Sorry, I'm here. It wouldn't let me unmute. Holly Williams.
Holly Williams, in front of all these people, I have to give you a big thank you for your incredible work on the budget and your help with OEC and strategic guidance. Really great. Okay, Shelley Nolan.
Commissioner Bai, I'm here. Deidre Gifford.
Oh, Deidre, I got to give people more time to unmute.
Yeah, it was slow.
Welcome, Commissioner Gifford.
Thank you, Commissioner Bai.
Shelley Nolan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Shelley Nolan. I'm the Director of Women's Services for the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. Nice to be here.
Welcome, Shelley. Michael Williams.
Deputy Commissioner for DCF.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. Lena Halleran.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tawny Fo. I'm here on behalf of Department of Housing and Commissioner Salem Mascara-Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Jordan
Good
Schaff.
afternoon. Deputy Commissioner Hanks is also here. Tawny, I'm glad you're here. We weren't certain, so I appreciate you. A bunch of us are booked right now, so housing is on deck.
Wonderful.
Housing is in the house, and we're going to have some exciting news from housing, so we know why you're here. Just wonderful collaboration we're having with Department of Housing. So thanks to both of you for being here. Jordan Schaff. Charlene Russell Tucker, or designee.
Hi, this is Jordan Schaff.
For Charlene Russell Tucker. Deputy Commissioner.
Jordan, welcome. And then who was after Jordan?
So Desi Naismith, Deputy Commissioner, is on, but I happen to have a few moments. I wanted to jump in here as well. So you're treated doubly, with education here.
I love you and Desi. Thanks for being here. We've got an illustrious crowd. I know Commissioner Giuttani is joining us at about 2. Is there anyone else from DPH here? Okay, but she will be here. Terrence Chang.
Sorry, no Terrence, but you have me instead. So Sean Bradbury, Senior Director of Government Relations and External Affairs for CSCU, and happy to be here with all of you.
Happy to have you and your partnership on a number of issues. Elena Trueworthy, we know you're here. You've already spoken. Stephen Hernandez.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see everybody. Stephen Hernandez here from the Commission. Women, Children, Seniors, Equity and Opportunity.
Great, thank you. And thank you for your service and your help with the 2Gen work. Next up is Andrea Burnell.
Hi, Andrea Burnell here from the State Department of Education, where I'm the 619 Part B coordinator, which is preschool special education.
Thanks so much, Andrea. Louis Talarita.
Good afternoon, Louis Talarita, State Department of Education, serving as the state coordinator for the McKinney-Vento homeless.
Great, thanks, Louis. Marlene Paternotte.
Yes, Department of Education, Title I Director.
Great. Charlene, we've got a lot of your people here right now. So happy to have you all. Karen Pascali.
Hi, Commissioner. Hi, everyone. Early Head Start Director representing Head Start programs.
Great. Ava Bermudez.
Everyone. Hello, everyone. Ava Bermudez Zimmerman representing Childcare for Connecticut's Future and CSEA SEIU.
Great. Thanks, Ava. Elliot Brenner. Patricia Bryant Bosalao. Sorry, Patricia.
Beausoleil, yes.
Beausoleil.
Hi, this is Patty Bryant. Nice to see everybody.
Karen Rainville.
Hey, everybody. Karen Rainbow with Connecticut OEC.
I'll take that as a here. Great to have you here, Karen. Edie Reichert.
Hi, everyone. Edie Reichert, Director of Sleeping Giant Daycare. I represent the state-funded centers.
Welcome, Edie. Caroline Austin. Kim Oliver.
Hello, everyone. I hope we can hear me. City of Hartford, Department of Families, Children, Youth, and Recreation. Good afternoon.
Hi, Kim. Kathy Batista.
It's a pleasure to be here with both commissioners and with everyone else as well. I'm Kathy, the president of the Connecticut Family Resource Center Alliance.
Great. Just so many great people here. Thank you all for your time and being with us today. Okay. Now I am going to, I gave a legislative update. And so next, looks like I hand it to Rachel.
So for folks who are members of the cabinet, if you're interested in making a comment, you can use the reactions hand raising feature, and then we'll be able to actually field your questions as we go. So for members of the cabinet, if you had feedback about the legislative update or questions, this is the time for comment about that item. All right, so I'll go in order of hand raising. So a question from Sean Bradbury. I'm going to unmute you. Oh, you'll unmute yourself.
Great. More of a quick comment. I just want to say a lot of really great stuff in here for OEC. And one of the things that I don't know if it's captured in some of the funding that's in there, but part of the higher education omnibus bill was a study between CSEU and OEC to help develop a plan to expand childcare facilities on all of our campuses across all 17 system-wide. In addition, there's $10 million in the bond package to help support those efforts moving forward. So just a lot of good stuff on this list. Just wanted to add two quick other things to the flood of good OEC news that we have from this session.
Yes, thank you, Sean. Thank you for adding that. And I think those will be really helpful.
Thanks, Sean. We have a question also for or feedback from Karen Pascal.
Thanks so much. This isn't feedback on the legislative update, but it is a federal update that I think fits well here, if it's okay if I share.
Yeah, sure.
Great. So we do have a federal update regarding Head Start eligibility that we are really excited about. So the Office of Head Start will now include families receiving SNAP to be categorically eligible for Head Start and Early Head Start services. I just want to flag that this change will allow more children and families access to services, and it's really going to make the eligibility process easier for both programs and families. And quick shout out and thank you to Elena Trueworthy with the State Head Start Collaboration Office for helping to connect our Head Start programs to DSS and the SNAP Director. We've already had an initial planning session, and we're looking to develop a statewide approach for marketing and outreach efforts to get the word out to families, and also for documenting that eligibility, and then for from future cross-training opportunities.
That's such great news, Karen. Thank you for sharing. And Commissioner Gifford's on the call. It's so complicated for families to have all these different eligibility requirements. This is a major improvement by Head Start, because one of the big challenges in Connecticut is getting families who qualify. So this is going to make a big difference. So thanks for that. And thanks to DSS for already collaborating.
Cabinet members, if anyone else has any feedback on the legislative update, now would be the time to raise those, though you can always add things in the chat or communicate outside of the conversation today. Otherwise, I think we may be ready to move on to our next item on the agenda, Commissioner Bai.
Yes, we are. I'm going to hand it over to Julie to give the context, but Julie, if I can just say a few words. We've been working for years on sort of the cost of care, and this is a federal requirement. And the numbers are a little eye-popping, but that's the reality. And you'll see that it's comparative to what's happening in other states. So, Julie, I'll let you give more context, but I think this is a really important document and really grateful to UConn for their work. And it's an ongoing process, so we'll look for feedback now, but then also in an ongoing way, because it might take both members of the cabinet and the public a little bit to digest it before they give feedback, but you'll give them information about how to do that.
Yes, well said, Commissioner. Thank you. This is a little eye-popping. This is the first time that the state of Connecticut CCDF has been required to do a narrow cost analysis. It is very different than the market rate survey. Everyone should have received, the cabinet members should have received, in addition to the agenda, a draft of the market rate survey. It is in draft form, the report is. At the end of this cabinet meeting, there will be a link posted to both the narrow cost analysis and the market rate survey for public comment. As mentioned earlier in the chat, if there's any questions that are posted in the chat that we can't get to or we're not able to answer, we will address them then when we post the responses to the public comment on both the narrow cost analysis and the market rate survey. I want to really thank UConn, our partners, UConn and Social Finance. This has been a huge lift. Like I said, Connecticut has never done a narrow cost analysis. This looks at what it costs providers to provide childcare services. So it's not looking at necessarily what providers are charging families, although that is incorporated into this model. I'm going to let UConn take it from here, but we welcome any and all input because, like Commissioner Bai mentioned, some of the information in here is going to be very, very eye-opening, not just eye-popping, but eye-opening. So Kate Parr, please take it away.
Rookie mistake, I was on mute. So thank you, Julie. It's my pleasure to present to you the narrow cost analysis. We performed this on behalf of the OEC UConn partnership, which includes my team at the UConn School of Social Work, as well as some very patient and hardworking people at the OEC. I want to just emphasize that this is a draft. It is very much open for public comment. So we really welcome your comments, your questions, your thoughts. I would also direct your attention, I believe Rachel is going to put the detailed appendix that really lays out all of the assumptions that we used to derive these estimates. So you'll be able to see where they came from. But this particular analysis, because of time, is relatively high level. So I'm just warning you in advance. So Sinead, the next slide. Okay, so a little bit about a narrow cost analysis. So as Julie said, a narrow cost analysis is now required for the CCDF federal grants. This cost analysis, and in part, this is where the eye-popping part comes from. The cost analysis is expected to be exhaustive of costs, including staff, trainings, materials, occupancy costs, and so forth. We're presenting this now, but the final version is due June 30th. So there's lots of time for people to hopefully digest this work and provide us with feedback. Would you like to move to the next one, Sinead? Okay, so what a narrow cost analysis is not. There's been a lot of discussion about the cost of quality, possibly looking at, the cost of accreditation. That's not factored into this. This is really focusing on costs as they are. It is exhaustive. There's a lot of costs in there in terms of training, assessment, and so forth, but it's not specifically a cost of quality analysis. It's also not synonymous with the market rate survey. You're probably familiar with that. It surveys what programs charge families, but we know that that doesn't necessarily reflect accurately the full cost of providing care in terms of additional staff time, possibly staff bringing in, materials themselves. I think many of you understand the lengths to which people go to provide a quality childcare. So this is what the narrow cost is not. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick preview of what we're going to go through today. We're going to take a deepish dive into the methods first. You will be able to look in the appendix and see in minute detail the assumptions that we made. We're also, specifically in terms of our results, we're going to present model output for infant and toddler costs, for preschool rates, as well as family child care. We did do some modeling around profit, sort of pre-pandemic, during the pandemic, and then possibly post-pandemic in a potential sort of perfect world. Those models I'm not going to go through today. They are in the appendix if you want to look at them. We're just going to focus on the costs of care. Okay, the next slide, Sinead. So again, these are the 4 buckets of analyses that we engaged in. So our primary findings are around the age group for expected costs for infants and toddlers and preschool. The profits, again, I would refer you to the appendix. The license exempt, this is really looking at public schools. They are not required to have a license through OEC because they're in another facility that is covered by a different set of regulations. So the license exempt, we'll just talk about the public schools today. The other settings is in the appendix, and we're also going to talk about family child care and look at some of the potential costs if we look at different salary levels. So if you want to move on to the next one, Sinead, please. So this is just a little bit describing our process. We started by reviewing studies from other states. We found 15 of them. We also reached out to other states and had some conversations with them and how they had conducted their cost analysis. Then with OEC's help, we started to gather data from existing resources, such as publicly available IRS forms, and also some programs that report to the OEC. This was very much an iterative process. We kind of worked in lockstep with a group of stakeholders at OEC, and as well as some subject matter experts. So this information, they're the first 2 steps. The third step, we're starting today for the stakeholder feedback. Next slide. Okay, this slide gives you a sense of where we did go to gather data. When we say existing data, what are we talking about? Well, we looked at the workforce registry. All publicly funded programs are required to report their employees and their salaries to the workforce registry We worked closely with social finance on their draft workforce compensation schedule that was submitted to the legislature this past session. We also worked with Bureau of Labor Statistics data, the 211 data, and as I mentioned, the IRS data. There was a study done by NEAR very recently that was a survey related to special education needs, and that's something we used when we were looking at the public school data. So the distinction I want to make clear is that we used, for this analysis, we used only available sources. We didn't go out and survey providers. We kind of worked within the requirements of the federal legislation. So next slide, please. Okay, so the PCQC tool is the provider cost of quality care, and it's publicly available. The link is here in the slides. You're welcome to go and play with it. Basically, it's maintained by the Department of Health and Human Services for this purpose. So it's there so that folks can, whatever their issue is, they can develop a cost of care. And essentially, it's a very simple tool. It works as a balance sheet that sums up a list of costs and revenues. What it's helpful for, aside from doing the calculations, is that it prompts you to list a large number of costs. So, the food costs, the internet costs, the phone costs, the rent costs, the electricity costs. I won't go through all of them. They are in the appendix, but it is very exhaustive in terms of what it's looking for. And then on the on the revenue side, you're looking at tuition. So you're looking at what providers receive from their parents. So the way this works is you create different sets of assumptions around these costs, and you run multiple scenarios. So the assumptions are very important. That's why I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through them so people can understand what we did. Ultimately, we ran multiple scenarios, and we really came to a point of data saturation where the scenarios were effectively producing very similar results. So we felt that this was robust to different sets of scenarios. And the final thing to really note is that this is the industry standard tool. We spoke to other experts who've done multiple studies. This tool is the basis for the Center for American Progress. And in the literature review, we found that most other states use this. So we felt pretty confident that this was the right tool. So now we're going to dive into methods a little bit in terms of salaries. So when we look at estimating costs, although there's an exhaustive list, the biggest chunk of costs, I think, as most of you know, is staff costs. So we really considered essentially 3 different scenarios when we were looking at this. We developed costs from the workforce registry, which again is sort of what providers report back to the state when they have state funding. The second one, you may not be as familiar with, but there is social finance created a draft compensation schedule that OEC was required to submit to the legislature. It basically was based on credentials. So it was somewhat aspirational. It looked at sort of entry-level wages for someone moving into this field with high school degree, with CDA, associates, a bachelor's, and a master's. So this is really, it's focused on the principle there was really finding parity with elementary schools. So I'm not an expert on that work that was done, but we do use that in here as sort of our middle of the road scenario for salaries. But because the workforce compensation schedule doesn't factor in experience, we estimated mid-career level salaries, essentially taking a standard 12-step ladder, which is standard across elementary schools, and looking at a 3% increase for each year up to the sort of the 6th level. Again, this is something that's in the appendix, but that's how we really wanted to look at a range of salaries to see where we came out. The public schools that we're going to talk about also, they're really a different type of service. A lot of the local municipal boards really have the service to serve their children who need early intervention services. So because of that, it had a very different staffing pattern, including several specialized staff, such as speech language pathologists and social workers. So you'll see that when we get there, that it's sort of a both and. Yes, they have the teachers in the classroom, the teacher's aide, the director, but they also have additional services available for children, and this really affects their costs. So the next one, Sinead. So, and just a quick word on this. I think this is another sort of contentious area, so it's worth bringing it up. Benefits are challenging. Some of the budgets we reviewed had no benefits. Others had more significant benefits in terms of their discretionary benefits like health, retirement, and dental. So we basically found that budgets were between 0 and 14% of the wage bill for privately run childcare. So our analysis used that 14% when we looked at estimating costs. In some sense, if you're going to have a quality childcare, we should at least be meeting the maximum, in terms of support for staff. Just as an FYI, for those who followed the legislative session, there was a bill that looked at potentially $7,500 per staff as a minimum for benefits. And it actually turns out that the 14% for our example for the infant and toddlers and the pre-K programs is actually almost identical to $7,500. So, and then we kind of have the knee-jerk moment where we looked at the BLS compensation survey and found that public schools pay an average of 45% of salaries of the wage bill for their benefits. So this remains an area where we need to think about, what does parity with elementary schools really mean? But for our analysis, we went with what was happening in the field because this really is meant to be current costs. And mandatory benefits, that's benefits that everyone pays, the standard FICA, paid family leave, workman's compensation. So yeah, so those are the benefits. And I highlight these because these are the main costs. This is 80% of what's driving our model. Next slide. Okay, so we're heading right to the chase. We're going to look at the infant and toddler and the preschool costs. So if you want to switch to the next one, Sinead. So this is an example of the PCQC output. We use the example for both infants and toddlers and preschool. We estimated based on a large size program. And we also used kind of our middle of the road estimates, which are those the draft workforce compensation salaries. So this is essentially this is a
yeah, I just asked her to make it a little bigger
sure,
because it's hard to
it's too small. Sure. Go ahead, Sinead. Yeah. I think what this shows is that salary costs and benefits are really the two largest components of the cost. And we do provide in the appendix, we do provide a breakout of what is in there. The overall estimate with these workforce compensation salaries in there and a 14% benefit rate is an average cost per child for preschoolers of $14,487. Is it okay if we go on to the next one? Yep, okay. So for infants and toddlers, it's a similar analysis. Again, this is the PCQC output. My apologies for it being a little bit small. Again, we're using salaries from the draft workforce compensation schedule. And the cost per year, this is where your eyes are all popping out of your heads, is $28,149 or $541 per week. So what's driving this is we are requiring, based on the state statute, the staffing ratios are much higher for infants and toddlers than for preschoolers. We're also assuming at least a BA teacher and at least a CDA worker for every classroom, plus a floater, and then some administrative staff. So again, I'd refer you to the appendix to look at what specifically went in there, and you can also certainly put questions in the chat. So let's, oops. Okay. It looks, this is not my slide. So, Jill, did you pop this in there?
I
Just
did.
for comparison? Yeah.
Shanae, I just want to check to make sure, can everyone see the entirety of the slide?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, I just want to make sure because it's a little big. But in any case, this slide is just to provide a comparison from the Center of American Progress. So while our numbers from our narrow cost analysis are eye-popping, they are in alignment with what other national surveys are showing for the cost of care. This one specific graph breaks it down by infant and then toddler, preschool, and school age. So what we found from the narrow cost analysis is that our data is pretty much in alignment with what's being published nationally.
Yeah, and I think that's great to point out. If we look at that first monthly value, it turns out to be 27,000, which for infants. So that's right in alignment with what we found. And again, we're actually using the same calculator, maybe some different assumptions, but yes, this is very close to what we have. This is a terrific slide.
And sorry, I just thought it would help to have some national context, and Julie found this slide, which is helpful.
Yeah, it's perfect. The preschool child care works out to be annually, bless you, 15,840. So we are exactly, even though we're sort of known as a high cost state, we are exactly in alignment with what the Center for American Progress predicts. So that's excellent. Thank you for adding that. Okay. So this is not going to feel as eye-popping. If you want to move on to the next slide. So we looked at public school preschools. There are a number of programs, sort of our DCEX programs, our license exempt programs who accept care for kids. So we wanted to also look at the costs associated with that. And I think, the main thing, these are preschoolers. And just as a reminder, our value for preschoolers was about $14,500 per year or $280 a week. So this is significantly higher. It's about 1.7 times the 14,000 that we estimate. But we need to remember that these are fundamentally different environments. So these are families with children who have higher needs, who qualify for IDA Part C, and are served through the public school. So there's a much broader range of staff and skills that are set for most than for most prior private providers. The estimate is $25,126 or $483 per week. Now, I say that I am aware, obviously, there are some children in public school preschools that are sort of model students, and some towns do have an integrated program. But generally speaking, what we did is we looked at that NEAR study I mentioned in the beginning that did a survey of programs that provided services for special needs children, and looked at sort of the part of an FTE for the social worker, for the speech language pathologist, for the occupational therapist, and so forth, and really looked at the I'm sorry, a little distracted with the beeping. So looked at the costs associated with all of those staff. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay, and here we looked at licensed family childcare, which is our final example.
Hey, can I just interrupt for one
Sure.
sec? 'Cause there's a little confusion. The school, that based on a school year or a full year? I think there's confusion in what the words mean in the chat.
It's based on a school year.
School day, school year.
Yep.
Okay.
So we had shorter, we put in shorter hours for the public school than we did for the private centers. So they were only operating, I think we put them in as an 8-hour day, which might be a little generous for some programs. Okay, licensed family childcare. So let's move on to the next one. Oops. There we go. So we assume for licensed family childcare, there's 4 preschool children being served, 2 infants, and 2 school age as sort of our example program. It's not accredited. We estimate, because family childcares often have longer hours, and then on top of longer hours, you have the cleaning, the prep, the bookkeeping, the billing. We estimated all of this would come to about 68 hours per week. And there are different values, if we look at some hypothetical scenarios, between whether you're sort of paying them hourly, which is an hourly rate for 68 hours, or you're paying them a salary, which is just a salary no matter how many hours they work. So that's a little bit of a guide to help you walk through this table. This first row here is our base case. This is, okay, this is what we think the world looks like. And what we estimated, again, using the PCQC, we estimated an annual cost per child of $10,759, which again is much cheaper than sort of center-based care or public school. And that works out to about $207 per week. But if we look at a 68-hour hourly rate, that's only $8.50 an hour for those family childcare providers. So that's significantly below the minimum wage, and the sort of, as an owner operator, their take home at the end of the year, which we're calling their salary, is about $30,000. So that's kind of what we think the base case is right now. When we started to look at the workforce compensation schedule, we considered 2 possibilities. We considered someone with a high school degree who doesn't have additional training. So that's our level 1 wage parity. And then our second tier is this level 4, which is someone with a bachelor's degree based on the workforce compensation schedule. So when we look at, for instance, level 1, and we look at salary parity, we are looking at someone working 64 or 68 hours per week and making an hourly take-home wage of $9.62 per hour. On the other hand, if we look at wage parity, so we take the estimates that are in the, Rachel?
Oh, no, I was just gonna, Kate, didn't want to interrupt. I just wanted to be mindful of time. In another minute or so, I think we're gonna move to public comment. So
Okay.
so sorry to have interrupted right at that moment.
Yep, no, I appreciate it. So the wage parity, this is where, you know, folks are getting paid an equivalent hour for, as someone who works in a center, they would be getting $16.36 per hour, and that would be an annual salary of about $5,800. So let's move on. We have 2 more slides. So the limitations, although we use the standardized tool, the PCQC is very dependent on assumptions. This was not a statistical approach, but basically we, you know, we ran this analysis multiple times with multiple different assumptions and kind of reached the point of data saturation. Another limitation is we have existing sources. They may not be as fully representative as we would like. And then also we tried to abstract from COVID, which is basically 2020 and 2021 data, by considering 2018 and 2019 costs. There are some scenarios in the appendix that look at profitability during COVID, and I would direct you to those as well. And if you want to move to conclusions. So our conclusions, we didn't show the fiscal analysis for childcare providers, but it does affirm that childcares are really struggling during COVID. And pre-COVID, they were doing better. But even if they got to the 75th percentile of the market rate survey, they're essentially breaking even. This is not a high profit enterprise. Our costs are primarily composed of labor. Infants and toddlers are $28,150 because they have more staff per child. And something to bear in mind is we set labor costs at entry-level wages for a bachelor's level teacher and a CDA for a teacher's aide based on parity with the elementary schools. Public schools, something to bear in mind as you're thinking about this figure is that they are very different in the sense that they offer multiple services for children who need early intervention. And then, of course, the family child care. When we think about parity, we need to think about, is it salary parity? Is it wage parity? But in the base case, we're looking at family child cares earning about $850 per hour and an equivalent salary of about $30,000 per year. So that's everything I have. I really welcome your comments, both through the public comment period and also if folks have things they want to share right now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kate, and to your team as well for the robust analysis and your presentation. And this is the space where we have time for members of the cabinet to provide feedback or ask questions. And so if members of the cabinet are interested in asking a question, if you could just use the hand raising feature and we will call on you accordingly. Throughout the meeting as well, we can remind you that you can use the chat feature if you'd like to ask a question of the agency, and we will respond to as many as are possible, but we'll also be responding after the meeting concludes. This was a very robust presentation, and as such, it might take a little to absorb. So we understand if there aren't comments at this time, but this is the time for cabinet members to ask any questions you might have. Elena Trueworthy, you have your hand raised.
I do, thank you. I just wanted to thank UConn for this really in-depth work and research to go through each of these different pieces of the costs. It makes me think about Head Start in particular, about potentially being able to take this to the next step when it comes to Head Start, and really looking at those additional comprehensive services that a Head Start, early Head Start program offers as well, to be able to come up, not just with the costs that were being talked about, but any additional costs that Head Start and early Head Start programs might have. So just wanted to say thank you for this information.
Thank you, Elena. That's really helpful. We certainly welcome the opportunity to do that.
Julie Giacconi, you have your hand raised.
I do. I also want to second that and thank UConn and Social Finance, our partners. I think it's important to add that this is a draft and there will be different iterations of the PowerPoint presentation depending on the stakeholder audience. So it's the same data that is being shared. It just may be shared in a different format. Kate referred to an appendix, and there will be additional opportunities to view the presentation of this information. We're going to have this is recorded, but we will also have a separate recording that is specific to just the NCA, the narrow cost analysis. We also, and I know Meryl's on the call, have to schedule some time with Meryl so that we can come on the Alliance call and discuss the market rate survey as well as the narrow cost analysis. So there will be multiple opportunities to digest this information, kind of think about implications, next steps. I think while it's very eye-popping, it also provides us an opportunity to take a look at what the legislation has already done in moving in this direction for first steps, which is amazing, and be thinking about, so what do we need to do next to keep this moving forward? So I just thank you very much, UConn. We really appreciate all the work that you have put into this.
All right. I just want to offer up one final call for members of the cabinet to raise questions or provide feedback in this forum. And thank you so much again to the UConn team for their contributions at the meeting today. And I think we actually, timing wise, are right on target because we've just been joined by Commissioner Giuttani. So I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to Commissioner Bai.
Thank you so much. And Commissioner Giuttani, thank you for joining us. We have some really exciting announcements around family and child health and wellness that you're going to share with us, sort of tagged on to my legislative report, but this is from Department of Public Health and directly impacts families with young children. So I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Giuttani.
Sorry, that mute button was pressed and unpressed, but not responding fast enough. So I apologize for the delay. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm very excited to share some of the things that in this legislative session, our friends in the General Assembly were able to get through. And with the governor's leadership, we have a number of things that are really coming our way in terms of DPH, but specifically to talk about two things I think related most particularly to this group for children. And so what I want to start by talking about is the bill that was passed regarding lead. And I want to highlight just some major points in terms of HB 5045. So that was the lead bill that was passed. And what this bill does is it lowers the reporting threshold to DPH for lead from 10 micrograms per deciliter to 3.5. So this is an important point because it's, and the major take home I would say of this entire bill is lowering the numbers. That's going to be the consistent theme that you hear. And so, you know, first it's lowering the threshold of what is reported to DPH from 10 to 3.5. The next is lowering the threshold for parental notification with information about the state's Birth to 3 program and the dangers of lead poisoning from 5 to 3.5. So parents get notified at 5, but now that is brought down as well. Now there's a gradual lowering of the threshold that requires local health departments to do epidemiologic and on-site investigations from 20 to 5. And the reason it's gradual is because if we just flooded local health departments all at once with all the children potentially that could benefit from this, but you know, it just needs to be done in a stepwise fashion. And so this is why it's a gradual process over about 2 to 3 years. Next, it requires primary care providers to test for lead annually in children 3 to 6 years old who DPH considers at high risk for lead poisoning. Next, it requires DSS to apply for a Medicaid waiver to add services to address health concerns associated with high blood levels. So this now gets to the piece about, you know, if we identify somebody, a child, as having an elevated level, how are we going to pay for it? And so in this program, some of the remediation that is going to be done is, you know, proposed to be supported by this program and will be. But in addition to that, in terms of the care of the patient, this is where the Medicaid waiver will be very important. Next, it requires the DPH commissioner to convene a working group to recommend future legislative changes to lead statutes, including but not limited to the potential need for lead screening in pregnant persons and or those planning for pregnancy in schools and at child care centers. And this working group would also determine who the data should be reported to and if additional data should be collected. So that is the major summary of what this lead bill is doing in terms of health of children. And I know that there were also questions about doulas, but I wanted to stop there for a moment and see, Commissioner Bai, if there was anything else that you wanted me to specifically address there.
No, I think that's great.
Okay, so, you know, I mean, I think the main take home here, and, you know, one of the things that I thought was just really impressive in its passing through the House is that it was passed unanimously. I mean, it is fully recognized that this is a problem. I think this is such an achievement in a year where there was money that could be put to a chronic problem, one that we know affects young children the most. And I would also just say that in addition to these particular, you know, this bill, which is changing things specifically at the level of the patient, the child, the home, in addition to that, we, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, which was passed by the federal government, as DPH are getting a lot more money to be able to support local water systems in changing lead service lines. So lead service lines are those big pipes that run in the street that then, you know, you have pipes that come to your house that deliver water to your house. But there are a number of water systems that had these lead service lines that are in the street, and they, you know, often mirror some of the same communities where lead is a problem in paint and in housing stock and the like that we know. But I think the thing that is most exciting to me about this is that we are going to be able to address this issue of lead from a very multifaceted approach. We're reducing the level that triggers investigation both in the home, gets children connected with providers, and, you know, allows for the case management along with the lines of this Medicaid waiver that's being applied for, and at the same time doing things in the community, whether it be remediation in the homes that this bill will help provide for, or things like lead service lines. Along those same lines, one more thing to just mention in the bipartisan infrastructure law is that lead testing down the road is going to be available potentially to schools and childcare centers. We've received funding from the federal government to start thinking about this, start thinking about what that would mean, how it would happen, what we would do. And so I really think this is an exciting time to really deal with an age-old problem that has been around for decades. So there's more good stuff to come there.
You know, Commissioner, I bet there are others on the call who will agree with my comment, but you know, working in early childhood for so many years, I saw many a child impacted by lead poisoning. And it's devastating because it's so preventable. And the impacts can be really wide ranging on the child and the whole family. So I think this is very exciting and very pertinent. And, you know, child care centers will have a role. And I know you've met with our licensing division to talk about piloting ways that we can improve how we monitor this. So really grateful. Was there anything else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, so the only other thing I wanted to mention, because I believe you had some questions about the Doula Advisory Committee that was passed. This was in House Bill 5500. So I just wanted to share some comments about that. And so in this particular bill, this was around doulas, it establishes a Doula Advisory Committee within DPH. And the committee is in place to develop recommendations for the requirements for certification of doulas. Requirements include training, experience, or continuing education credits. And so really this committee is going to develop what those requirements should be, what those recommendations should look like, develop those standards for recognizing a doula training program curriculum that satisfies the certification requirements. And then the committee should be representative of communities the doulas would serve. So this includes diverse geographic, racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. And lastly, the bill requires the Doula Advisory Committee to establish a doula training program review committee to review and certify doula training programs to ensure that they meet the requirements of the Doula Advisory Committee and provide a list of doula training programs in the state. So this would really enhance our doula workforce in the state, set clear standards that doulas need to meet, set clear training programs that would be identified as programs that if you graduate from or you do their program, you would be able to be certified because they've been vetted in that way. And I think all of this is important because DSS has said that that is the type of training and requirements that would be necessary to then be paid as a doula. So it all comes together, you know, and there's a reason for this. And what we've been very sensitive to in the meetings that have happened within DPH so far is there are a lot of people who are functioning as doulas right now, and we don't want to leave anybody out, particularly in the most at-risk communities where doulas might be serving a very, very important purpose in the childbirth process. And so that's the reason for making sure that it's very representative of the groups involved most broadly. And that's what this advisory group will be able to do.
Awesome. Awesome. And I'm really interested, Commissioner, in how the community health workers and the doulas can come together as
Absolutely.
we pilot universal home visiting in Bridgeport. And thanks for your partnership there, and Commissioner Gifford and others as we plow our way into that pilot. But I think doulas and community health workers may overlap there. So.
I completely agree. And I think that's, you know, getting some sense of this pilot and figuring out timing, I think, because, you know, I think doulas need to be introduced at the right time before maybe it's too late or, you know, in the whole childbirth process, you know, so not after the fact, but before would be ideal. So figuring out how this all works will be helpful as we do this program and can build it out further.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. And I might just ask Julie that perhaps at the next meeting, we could spend a little time about the Universal Nurse Home Visiting Program to update the cabinet on where that is. There's still some pieces being fit together right now, so it wasn't the right time. But I think when I look at the screen and who's on this call, there's so many agencies impacted, and the community health workers and the doulas, et cetera, all folks working with families giving birth or having young children want to know about things like Family Resource Center, access to birth to 3, special education services, so Head Start, early Head Start, all those things. So I think that for next meeting, we should plan to have the Universal Home Visiting Community Health Worker team come present.
Absolutely. Excellent idea.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks so much, Commissioner, for making time for us today. And now I'm going to turn it over back to Julie to get the inclusion presentation going.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. So I'm actually going to hand it over to Andrea Brunell from State Department of Ed, who will start us off on our presentation around strategic planning for inclusion. This was a joint effort, by the way. I just want to say OEC working with State Department of Ed. It's always a pleasure working with you, Andrea. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Julie, and thank you, Commissioner Bai, cabinet members, and guests at the cabinet meeting today. It's nice to see so many people here. So I am really pleased to introduce some work that we have been doing for quite some time that has been cross-agency, cross-organization that we feel is incredibly important and timely work right now. So why we began this work was, as Catherine mentioned in her presentation, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. We were very fortunate to be able to partner with the National Institute for Early Education Research. You may have heard to it referred as NEAR, to do a Connecticut preschool special education needs assessment in 2020. So they were able to look at sort of the landscape of preschool quality for special education, the landscape as we talk about things like standards, and also with regard to inclusion. We also measure inclusion through our annual performance report, which is data that we collect to give to the Office of Special Education Programs. We have an indicator 6 about preschool environments. Connecticut recently reset the targets for this, but we look for the majority of young children receiving preschool special education to receive the majority of their experiences in regular early childhood environments. So that's just to sort of set the context for the work that we are doing. One of the things that we are really, really proud of is that we have worked very, very closely and in partnership with many people. So first, I'd like to thank ECTA, the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center. They are an OSEP, an Office of Special Education funded TA center, so they're federally funded. And it was also, as Julie had mentioned, the Department of Education, the Office of Early Childhood, Head Start, and the Connecticut Parents Advocacy Center working together on this. That was again prompted by our original research by NEAR. We would encourage you, if you have any questions as we're going, drop them into the chat and we will do our best to address them as we go through our presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Cosette, who is the Part C director. I'm Part B coordinator. She's Part C early intervention, and she's going to go over the vision and mission that we drafted as part of this collaborative work.
Thank you, Andrea. So I'm just going to read off our vision and mission that we created, as Andrea said. So the vision of this group is each young child has the opportunity to benefit from meaningful participation in learning in high quality, inclusive early care and education setting. And that leads to our mission of the Connecticut Early Childhood Inclusion Strategic Planning Team exists to promote equitable access for children with disabilities in high quality early care and education programs that value and support each child and family's culture, and creates a strong foundation for participation, relationships, and learning in home, school, and the community, learning to success for all. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back to Andrea to talk about the next slide.
You know, if I didn't talk when I was on mute at least once per day, it wouldn't be a regular day for me. I apologize for that. So our next slide, I'm not going to read it to you. We just wanted to give you a little bit of a bird's eye view of who participated on this work. And you'll see that it is the Department of Education, CPAC, the Office of Early Childhood, inclusive of birth to 3, state-funded programs, early intervention, and we made sure that we also included a very authentic parent voice with the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. And hopefully, I'm not sure, Jane Hampton-Smith wanted to be with us here today, but our cabinet meeting overlapped with our special education cabinet as well. So if Jane is here, she will pop on at some point. So in an effort to just keep things moving, because I know we have limited time, I am going to introduce one of our partners at ECTA, Mary Louise. Mary Louise and Debbie Kate have worked with us tirelessly for the past, it's been about a year now, working with us on this project, and ECTA really deserves a lot of appreciation from us because they were instrumental in facilitating this work. They kept us from getting stuck and kept us moving along. So Mary Louise.
Thank you, Andrea. You can be so proud of the work you've done as a state. We did together draft a logic model, and I'll just do the high overview for this, starting with the vision on the far right and reading right to left, which is not our usual way of reading. Of course, we start with the vision. We are then going to focus on long-term outcomes, which we've been doing for some time. The reason for showing the logic model is to really give you the sense that we are working with all programs, personnel and families, and that our focus is on policy and procedure and also written, sustainable, cross-sector, cross-agency inclusion strategies. This logic model has led to action planning and accomplishments that we'd like to highlight at this point. And I'll turn it over to Michelle Levy for the next slide.
So one of the things that we kind of codified in a memo that is jointly issued by the Office of Early Childhood and the Department of Education is some guidance around children who attend childcare and receive other types of support. So we tried to make this as inclusive as possible to include birth to 3 services, preschool special education, or supports through Early Childhood Consultation Partnership, or ECCP. It's really important, I think, to remember that many families need childcare, of course, to go to school or to work, but often children need those additional supports, either in order to participate in that childcare setting or to just fully meet their developmental or educational or mental health needs. And sometimes those services and supports are easily integrated and coordinated, but there are times that coordination is much more challenging. And so with different organizations, of course, providing having different purposes and providing different portions of what that child and family needs. They have different staffing patterns and structures in place. And sometimes families are in this position to have to play liaison, advocate for their child, or be faced with difficult decisions. And so in putting this document together, we really wanted to set forth really important considerations that need to be made relative to the child's needs, the family's needs, and around how those services are coordinated and fit together. So this document includes some definitions and examples of some common models for coordinating services and some key considerations for each of those models for how the players need to work together to make it successful. Go to the next slide. So in addition to that more detailed memo, and I did want to just share that the memo that I just shared came out of, we started with a memo during the pandemic because we saw so many instances, and those challenges were just exacerbated by the conditions during the pandemic, concerns about health and safety, programs that were closed, and so this changes in delivery model. But we saw so many benefits to that document that we decided that we really wanted to make that a longer standing document. In addition to that longer memo, this planning team worked to create this shorter flyer, really focused on the inclusion of preschool age children with disabilities in early childhood programs. It includes the mission and vision of this group, discusses how an IEP team might consider the provision of special education services in an inclusive setting. It includes some great resources, including a link to the previous memo. And both of these documents really, I think, set forth that vision of the inclusion of young children with disabilities, while infusing that importance of the individualized decisions that are made to address the child's needs and or to meet the family priorities in the case of birth to 3 services. Hope these are helpful and they're a good starting place.
Thank you, Michelle. So I just wanted to, I'm going to speak to this slide. It's a really cool tool. And Michelle had kind of mentioned the number of different agencies, different programs, the amount of coordination that sometimes makes inclusion far more complex. So this is a tool, you can actually kind of see this is Connecticut's, we actually used this tool. And thank you very much for putting all of the links into the chat as we present. But this kind of looks at the landscape. It's an opportunity using this tool to compare critical program requirements. What's the difference between school readiness versus Head Start versus Care for Kids versus special education versus birth to 3, you know, and so forth. So you get to, it allows you to be very flexible depending on your work group. You can take a look at things at the regional level. You can take a look at things at the state level. You can bring it right down into the program level. It allows you to take a look at the different regulations, the different requirements. You can then go back and use the tool to reference during collaborative agreements, during other work groups, as an orientation resource for new staff. You can use it to consider budget presentations. You can use it to consider what this group is actually published, which is what Michelle just went over. And you can take a look at the template. I think we put it into the chat. There's also a really, another really cool tool that is the Preschool Inclusion Finance Toolkit that kind of takes a look at different ways to fund and how can you calculate what that funding looks like in order to get the resources to the children in their least restrictive environment. And I will pass it to Elena.
Great. Thank you so much, Julie. This is really exciting work, and I'm happy to be able to talk about another example of how this team has really put the logic model and the planning to action. And so from October 2021 through May of this year, we've been operating a community of practice between local education agencies, schools, and Head Start programs. And so we asked communities to come together as a team for this community of practice, and really want to thank ECTA for helping to facilitate these meetings. We had 4 over the course of the year, and they were so beneficial to be able to have some time to come together and to really talk about what was happening. And this was during the pandemic, and so it was even more critical that programs and partners had time to really think about how are they working together, what changed during the pandemic, especially with children with special needs and their families, and how best are we really supporting children during this time especially. And so this really dovetails to the previous slide because we were able to really think about what are the national rules and regulations, what are the state issued rules and regulations, and then how does that impact our local partnerships and work. And so the 4 communities were Danbury, East Hartford, Enfield, and Stamford. And we had some really great feedback around how kind of the next steps that they're going to take and that they are taking together to really think out of the box as to how to best support children with special needs and their families. Next slide. So we wanted to, and if it's okay, Rachel and OEC would like to just jump into some cabinet feedback and questions. And so one thing that we're really thinking about as a state leadership team is, where does this work live? And it is cross-agency, right? You just heard all the partners at the table, especially the close partnership with the State Department of Education. And so it really might fit well within the cabinet scope of work, right, or within the cabinet's umbrella. And so we wanted to ask the cabinet to consider how inclusion aligns and intersects with the mission of the cabinet. We will continue to meet monthly as a state planning team, and we'll continue to move this work forward, but wanted to make sure that we're connecting it with state systems that's really thinking cross-agency work as well. So if it's okay, I'd like to open it up to see if any cabinet members have some thoughts or questions just on the work that we're doing, what we're trying to achieve and accomplish, and your thoughts on connections to the cabinet as well.
Thanks, Selena, and thanks, team. So this is the space for cabinet members to offer feedback and questions, again, using that hand raising feature. And thanks to our OEC team for all of the great sharing of supportive resources in our chat thread today. I think we have the opportunity to hear from the cabinet members too about how their views on how this fits into the statewide work. So I do have a hand raised. That hand is Julie Giacconi.
Of course, I would have to contribute here. This is work that is near and dear to my heart. I think it's really important. We have a wide variety of stakeholders on this call, very diverse, and I think it's really, this impacts a lot of different sectors. I think when I was working back at CREC, the amount of time children spent on buses rather than in preschool programs, because they were being moved from one program over to the LEA to receive their services and then back. And all that time was lost. And these are children who their transitions, those are the most difficult for them. So I think that the implications are far and wide, but I just wanted to really comment, this is very, very important work. And my hope is that we can establish a work group to further this along.
Thank you, Julie. We have space for feedback from other public. Oh, I have Andrea Burnell.
Thank you very, very much, Rachel. So I just wanted to point out, one of the reasons why we're coming to the cabinet is all of us on this group, when I stepped into the meeting today, Commissioner Bai was talking about Margaret Mead, and it was the same quote that I had actually used with this group when we were planning for this presentation about never under a small group of committed people that they can change the world. So I think one of the things that we're asking is, because we are sort of a Margaret Mead group that's been doing this work, is we really, I think, feel collectively that the work needs to be systematized, and the collaboration needs to be more systemic and systemized. Right now, it does feel like we're falling into that Margaret Mead group of that small group of committed individuals. And I would love to know what other cabinet members think about how the cabinet relates to this work and systematizing this work and embedding this work in our other work.
Thanks for that prompt, Andrea. Commissioner Bai.
Thank you. I know we're getting to public comment, but I just think that when you look at the work, how important this is, but if ever there was a sign that we need to think about fewer silos, you just think about, you have school readiness, CDC, Smart Start, Head Start, all these programs, needing to have all the information they have and get all information out about inclusion rather than have a more systematized early childhood system. We're all working to provide high quality early childhood education. So I think there are many reasons, but I think inclusion is a really good example of the simpler we can make it for families. Not like, oh, you qualify for this, but not that, and you qualify for this and not that. I think the better off we'll be. And part of the charge of a cabinet or state advisory committee is to break down silos, to work to build a more unified early childhood system for the state. So I just think I couldn't help but look at that, all those different boxes across, and think, why so many, and how can we as a cabinet work to improve that? So I just couldn't miss the opportunity to say that had hit me. So, but I want to leave time for public comment. So Rachel, I'm going to turn it back to you.
We're still in a good space in terms of commentary on statewide inclusion, though we can move to public comment if cabinet members feel they have no more commentary on this topic. So we'll give a last call to cabinet members for commentary here on inclusion for children with special needs in preschool programs. And seeing no commentary from cabinet members, this is the space for public comment. So we're really grateful. We had at our height about 100 or so members of both cabinet and the public in attendance today. So for folks who are here who are not cabinet members, you can ask questions in one of two ways. You can use the raising hand feature, and depending on the amount of feedback, we'll go as quickly and speedily as we can. And for those who might not want to ask their question publicly, you can use the chat feature to also ask questions, and we'll do our best to moderate both sources. And I will continue to say words until I see some hands raised. This is the opportunity, though, for those who are not members of the cabinet. If you have feedback on anything you've heard about today, so we've talked about the narrow cost analysis, we've heard about legislative updates from both Commissioner Bai and Commissioner Tutani, and we've heard about this really important effort around statewide inclusion for children with special needs in preschool programs. So anything at this point that the public wants to raise comments, questions, this is your moment. And I thank everyone for your feedback also in the chat all along throughout the meeting. We've been trying to address those as they've come through.
Rachel, I think there's a job waiting for you at public television. I really
secret talent. It's a secret talent I've discovered in working for the state.
It's not so secret. We always have you moderate these things. So anyway, any questions? This is a chance that, that we've heard a lot. Oh, good. Christy Balka's bail us out here.
Great, Bethna, you've scooped me. Christy Balka, you have a question. Oh, and you are currently muted, so just take a moment to unmute yourself. I'm going to lower your hand.
Okay.
Virtual hand. Thank you.
Thanks for these great presentations. I particularly appreciated the clarity with which you presented the narrow cost of care study and the market rate survey, the difference between those two, and a full cost of care survey. And I'm curious what the next steps are after the public comment period for the narrow cost of care study. Like who's the audience for it, and how will it be used in making policy or planning program?
Christy, that's a great question. You ready to, you're going to answer that, Commissioner Bai?
I'm happy to take a stab at it, and Julie, you can follow up, but I think it's a super important question, because we're not just doing this to do this. We're doing this both because it's a CCDF requirement that for our federal grant, but it's also important for us to be thinking about what is a North Star for high quality care, for outcomes for children and families. We know that every investment we make in early childhood benefits the kids and the families, and frankly, the businesses and our communities. So they're super important investments. So I think what we really need is feedback on this. And that's why we presented it, as you said, with a lot of detail. And then we will work to update it. It could be, Christy, that we hear from a whole bunch of family childcare homes that say, this doesn't represent my true cost, or we hear from centers that say my benefits are really more than that. Where are you getting this number? We really want people to look at it critically, and then we will improve it. So I think, there's that. And then with the feds, there's a lot of movement to think about using these tools versus the market rate study, because we're using a market rate to set rates for childcare in what Janet Yellen describes as a broken market. So that's why the feds want states to really look at this, so that as we look to improve our rate setting for childcare subsidies, they're grounded in what's really happening in the state. And I think that's why UConn went into so many different sources of information. That said, Christy, I also think given the funding from the legislature, we'll be able to improve this as more people sign up for the registry, say with, the wage supplement, depending on how that rollout goes, we may have more people coming in the registry and having more data over the next 6 months. That's real-time data about what's happening. So Julie, I don't know if you want to add to that, but I just think we're trying to get public feedback to improve it, and then have a reboot and say, here, we've had feedback, here's an improved narrow cost analysis, and then move on and use that as the tool that we use to set rates ultimately.
Terrific. Thank you.
We have some feedback in our chat window. Actually, two different points of feedback, but kind of asking us a similar kind of question. How we'll be using some of the things that we've been talking about today. So the narrow cost study, we've just talked a little bit about how we're going to be using that in terms of potentially making some recommendations about care for kids rates. So I don't know if others want to provide commentary on that, but also we have feedback around whether or not, based on what we've learned from the inclusion work, whether we provide incentives for services and community-based programs. And Commissioner Bai, I think that speaks to both of what you just said with the evidence and how we're making some decisions.
And I think in terms of care for kids rates, some of that is based on what can be afforded. There was discussions about rates in budget negotiations, and that's where that happens. So, we've always been at 50% or below of the market rate in what we're setting care for kids rates at now. So it's not like we've ever set rates at the actual even market rate cost of care, which is far less than this. So a lot of that just depends on where we are and what the legislature and the governor are willing to entertain, and what's the path that they're going to choose to use to get to expanded access to high quality early childhood. So I don't, that's a complicated question. And on to Eileen's questions. Eileen, I have had very similar experiences that you've had. And Julie talked about it, with kids spending way too much time on buses to get to classrooms that aren't truly integrated, by the way, and leaving integrated early childhood settings. Now, I'm speaking from one district that I worked in. Don't mean to represent the state, because at the same time, I know a district where they have 100% push-in, where every preschooler is in a fully integrated classroom, and it's not a special education preschool classroom. So there's a wide range of practices. I think that, Eileen, I think it was Andrea calling for a committee. I think that childcare providers have so much to offer in terms of how we would like to see it, how we would like to see districts sending specialists into our programs. I speak now as if I'm still a director, but I think there's definitely room for a work group that could be informed by what childcare providers like Eileen with decades of experience working with children with disabilities, really wanting them integrated in their childcare or preschool program, but just not being an option because of the way services are offered. So Eileen, I think, and Eileen makes a really good point, if there were incentives for districts to support community-based supports, that would be really useful. And Eileen, I would say we've had really good luck with birth to 3 with legislation that told us to study it and come up with recommendations to try to reduce the number of transitions for children from birth to 3 to the public schools. And I think Andrea and Nicole would agree that that led to a much smoother transition to families with the very young children with disabilities and how that transition goes to the public schools. So there might be room for the cabinet making a recommendation to have some kind of committee on this without even needing legislation. So maybe we'll look to Andrea, to your committee to ask some of those questions. And if members of the cabinet are willing to participate, or there might be people on the call who are not members of the cabinet who'd be willing to participate, we could get your names if you put your names in the chat, and then we will work to bring you into this committee and move that forward. Does that make sense? Because I'm sure there's a lot of empathy for Eileen's comments. I know my hardest moments in early childhood were watching sometimes what the plan was for children with disabilities, leaving a high quality program to sit on a bus for an hour, to wait for a 2-hour program, to go back on a bus for an hour, to come back for an hour, to then be picked up by their parents to drive home for an hour. Like, just, it's difficult. So Andrea, go ahead. Sorry, Rachel.
No worries.
Thank you very much. And Commissioner Bai, and Eileen, I couldn't agree with you more that does happen. I just want to make sure that I also point out that we have LEAs right now that are working very, very hard to, and we're using this word a little bit differently, to provide itinerant services. I think most people think of itinerant services as, the parent brings, their child in a couple times a week for speech or OT. When I say itinerant services now, I'm really thinking of a model similar to what Rhode Island is using right now. And I'll broach that with, it's voluntary in Rhode Island, but a lot of people almost everyone's doing it. There are a lot of school districts in Connecticut now that are sending their services into community-based programs. And that does a lot. It increases capacity for kids to generalize skills in those programs. It helps avoid some of those transitions. And Commissioner Bai, I really appreciate you bringing this up as a committee of the cabinet, because right now I think we are seeing an explosion of referrals. I'm hearing that all over the state, and I'm hearing it nationally from my colleagues all across the country. And our schools are sometimes running out of space to even have some of their inclusive programs. And I am always, it always makes me happy to hear that people are willing to have that conversation. I just want to make sure that whatever kind of committee we form, we make sure it's very balanced. So we make sure that we have authentic voices from the schools and from community-based programs and from Head Start. So we can all have some conversations that there's some issues that I've been doing this for over 30 years, and these problems have been around for 30 years. They're not easy to solve, and we really need to have a really robust dialogue to think about how we can do things a little differently.
Yep.
Thanks, Andrea. We had a question in the chat. I see some hands raised. I'm just sort of going in order of how things were logged. So we did have a question from Eileen Ward about explaining the early childhood apprenticeships. Commissioner Bai, I don't know if you want to take that one, and then we'll go to the folks with their hands raised.
Sure. The legislature passed that. We're still sort of digesting the language. I will say that OEC is about to release this week some funding to pilot apprenticeship programs for existing apprenticeship programs to support them and learn from them. And that will help us design the apprenticeship program for this $5 million. I should also say that just this week, a very exciting development, OEC and SEIU signed an agreement around family child care apprenticeships with the Department of Labor. And so there is now a committee and an actual apprenticeship program for family child care providers. And that might be a good topic for a future meeting where we could get feedback from cabinet members and the public about that, because we don't have it designed yet, but we do have some investigation and pilots going on. We know there's some great sort of apprenticeship-like programs. There's a very formal process before you can call something an apprenticeship. So we're working on that, and we'll keep the cabinet posted.
Thanks, Commissioner Bai. Next, we're going to Kathy Batista.
Just a question. Would it be unreasonable to have participation from a member or two from the Office of Early Childhood's parent cabinet involved in this discussion?
Yes.
Okay,
Totally.
thank you.
Great suggestion.
And I believe Maggie might be on. Maggie, I believe we were working to get a member of the parent cabinet.
Yes.
As a part of this, as part of our bill. So
Yes,
what's that?
Our agency bill, which is 5279, the very first section of that bill adds a member of the OEC parent cabinet to this early childhood cabinet. And that bill passed on the last day of the session. So obviously we don't have an appointment yet, but it is an appointment of the governor. So yes, absolutely. We're very happy about that.
Excellent. Thank you, Maggie. So our next question comes from Caroline, last initial A. You have your hand raised.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. This is Caroline Austin, and actually Kathy kind of asked my question. Also, so good afternoon, everyone. Also, I'm thinking about potential, I don't know if there's the space for having focus groups. Are you able to hear me okay?
We can hear you okay.
Okay, I'm in a car. Thank you. So I'm thinking about this potential to have parent focus groups from different school settings, just to get like the community feedback. I don't know if that's something that can happen now. I don't know the time, but just in order to get, because I hear you asking for public commentary, that would be a really good way to get public commentary. I know that at one point years ago, this was something that I was fighting for my son, and I had nowhere to go and nowhere to turn, and it was frustrating. And so to be able to have these conversations with other parents, they would be thrilled because they want to know what's happening, and they're not able to, especially like PATH, different organizations like PATH down in the southern part of the state, and other organizations that work with parents of children with disabilities. They could add a lot to these conversations. So I just wanted to bring that up as well.
I really appreciate that, and that is an idea. We will definitely bring that to our parent cabinet because each of them is responsible for reaching out in their region. We have 2 parent cabinet members from each region of the state, and as part of their duties, they agreed to attend parent meetings in their region. But Elena and Shanae, I think that this is a really good suggestion that we think about doing some kind of parent focus groups to give feedback on this cost of care and inclusion. And I do think the parent cabinet, it would be a good job for them to think about how we could best do that. Thank you for that.
Thank you for that comment. That was great. So there's a little bit of there's some gratitude in the chat for focus on community-based programs, Commissioner Bai. And then if folks, while this is public comment in this forum, but the advent of the parent cabinet has allowed us to have greater connection with the community and with parents, feedback on all the things we're doing as an agency. As we're coming to the end of our conversation today, if there's any other parent feedback, this would be the public comment section. So if you're working your way up to providing comment, now is the time to log that either in the chat or using your hand raising feature where you could unmute and speak directly to the cabinet and the group. As a former educator and attender of many virtual meetings, I know most folks don't mind a silence, though it can get uncomfortable. So I will continue to say words for another moment. And then I think Julie and Elena, it may be time to close our meeting only marginally prematurely. think we're doing great on time.
I think we presented an awful lot of information today. So I think it's going to take time to digest. I know that the narrow cost analysis and the market rate survey, those two studies will be circulated more among various stakeholder groups. We want as much input as possible. I did put the link in the chat so that you can go in, much like when we do with regulations or when we do this with the CCDF plan. You can go in, take a look, read at your own leisure, and then open-ended comment. We'll be making arrangements for posting a video of the presentation on the narrow cost analysis. There's also this video from this cabinet meeting, and we'll be connecting with other resources such as the Connecticut Alliance to schedule a time to come on and answer folks' questions.
Great. And Julie, also, I think, cabinet members, you can feel free to email Julie or Kristen or Shanae if you have feedback about the meeting format. We know this was a lot of information today, that some of it was required to provide and some was we felt important, but we're open to feedback about how we can make these useful both to cabinet members and, you're really representing the public. So please do let us know. We are, believe it or not, I know there's been a cabinet for a while, but we're really out of practice. The cabinet didn't meet for a long time, and we want to use this body effectively. So really appreciate it.
To that end, Commissioner Bai, I have been notified that the next Early Childhood Cabinet meeting is currently scheduled for August 17th. So that's good to say publicly, time to be determined, and folks will communicate with members accordingly.
Okay. Great. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us. We're really grateful for your service to the state, and we look forward to your feedback and input, and have a great day.